Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome. It's another episode of Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio. Today I'm joined by Austin Cook. We're going to chat for a minute. Thanks for being here. But to the audience, if you're new, a couple things I want you to do. I want you to go to whistlekick.com. I want you to check out all the things that we're doing because we are more than just this podcast. We got products over there. You can use the code podcast15 to save 15% on something, one of the wide variety of things we've got there. And if you want to go deeper on this show, it's whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. Every single episode, all 800 and whatever this is, episodes are available for free for you. We don't hide them. We don't do anything. And help us spread the show because it leads to us bringing on more great people like Austin. Thanks for being here, man.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm honored.
I got to ask about that shirt. Like that, whew, I mean,
It's cool, right?
it is. And to folks that might be listening, it says wrestle judo jitsu in, I got to say, it looks like something Nike would have put out.
You know what? Well, thank you, or I'll accept the thank you from my man Justin Flores. He's on Instagram too at JFlow. He does a similar sort of thing to me, where implements no-gi judo, kind of directed at MMA. So I was at a clinic that he was giving in Virginia. Saw the shirt and I was like, man, I have to have one of these. And so, yeah, it might be my new favorite shirt. I like yours too. Your logo reminds me of the Mizuno.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny that when we put together the logo, I I spend a lot of time in marketing, but my philosophies around marketing are very simple. And there are honestly like two things I've ever done that I look at and I'm like, I don't know how I came up with that. One of them is this logo.
It's
And the
cool.
other is the brand name Whistlekick. If you look at it, like when I talk about the podcast website, Whistlekick, martial arts radio.com. Like that's the most obvious thing. And even the show name, Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, it's about as obvious as you
I,
get.
I love that. And I feel like a testament to it's the name that you chose is I didn't have any difficulty remembering it when I was like looking for the emails like Whistlekick. And that was sort of my motivation actually when choosing my Instagram name. Bad Boy Medicine. I wanted something just like ridiculous and stupid. It's like supposed to be ironic. It's like dumb. It's a joke. But it's one of those things where I feel like it's kind of hard to remember. You know, like people see it like Bad Boy Medicine. What's that? Like you have to go look. You know.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It sounds great. But
But uh,
the reason I wanted to ask about the shirt is because now I have dabbled, right? I've dabbled in judo. I've dabbled in jujitsu. I've got like 3 months of each, right? So just enough to know I know nothing. And I've done zero wrestling other than, growing up as a kid and you sit on your friends. And that's not really wrestling, even though you call it that. But from my outside vantage, jujitsu practitioners often seem to forget their lineage in relationship to judo. And wrestlers seem to look at judo and jujitsu in this like, you guys are over there, we're over here,
yeah,
distanced way, and you've got it all on the same shirt, and so I'm kind of digging that.
yeah. Thank you. You're not alone, and I feel like that. By the way, half the time too, that I don't know anything about wrestling, judo, or jiu-jitsu, which is part of the cool thing I think about martial arts. Like, it would be boring if we were able to learn even almost like 50% of it. Right? It keeps it interesting. But yeah, I like this, and you're right that there is sort of this, I don't know, almost like kind of tribal, culty. Kind of mindset that people adopt sometimes, which makes sense, right? You invest a lot of time into a
Sure.
martial art, and it's sort of validating to hear that this is the best, and I didn't waste my time doing X, Y, or Z, right? But in reality, if any one of these martial arts, I mean, they've stood the test of time and have had countless people kind of prove their effectiveness. But I think that people sell themselves short when they want to become the best grappler they can be. And jiu-jitsu, I think, is sort of the most complete form of grappling right now. And judo and wrestling, it's my opinion, those are by far the best sort of tools for stand-up grappling and can assist in the jiu-jitsu. And then once we get to the ground, jiu-jitsu, I think, is the most effective. But at the same time, I use a ton of wrestling and judo. And then uh, I sort of approach it as they're positional martial arts. So you can dictate the position with wrestling and judo, and
Mm-hmm.
then jujitsu sort of fills in the gaps to finish. So to finish with a submission, choke, arm bar, knee bar, heel hook, etc. So yeah, I think together they're the kind of ultimate combo.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I would do more martial arts if I more grappling martial arts. That's what I'm interested in. If I had them available to me, so if I had sambo, I did a sambo tournament one time. It was a lot of fun. I would totally do that if it were near me. I've done a little bit of sumo, learned a lot from that as well. So any grappling that I can sink my teeth into, I'm always down to do it.
Mm. What I find interesting is, there's this crazy paradox within the martial arts. The folks who have been training a while and tend to be really good tend to have this attitude that you do, and admittedly, I share, and I would say the vast majority of our guests share, in that I want to learn the other stuff. Right? You said quite a few things about combining, and I want to learn as much as I can, and I'm scratching the surface, but that's awesome, right? Like I'm right there with you, and yet we get a lot of folks who, you know, a lot of them haven't even trained, right? But they draw these very hard lines, and it's no secret I come from a striking background, right? My background is kickboxing and karate and taekwondo, and even though I, like you, want to do everything, but people will say things like, "Oh, karate doesn't work."
Yeah,
Okay,
not they're not
so
saying that to
so
one boy though.
well, sure, but and my response is, okay, so the jab doesn't exist in karate,
Right.
right? Or the front kick doesn't exist in karate. And those lines get really blurry. What is karate versus taekwondo versus Krav Maga versus whatever? And from what you're saying, from what I understand in my dabbling, you could make the same kind of argument about the blurriness between wrestling, judo, jujitsu, hapkido, right? There's a lot of overlap.
Absolutely, and that's a very sort of seasoned point to make because you're completely right. I mean, let's take hip throw, fireman's carry, double leg, suplex. All of these are techniques that aren't only in judo and wrestling, but also pretty much any grappling martial art. I mean, all folk style, freestyle, Greco, sambo, sumo. I'm sure Krav Maga, judo, obviously jiu-jitsu. They exist in all of them. So you're absolutely right. Like, how do you define like what is
Mm,
wrestling, what is judo, what is jujitsu? I mean, judo has submissions too, right? So we have arm bars and chokes, um, but really, I think it's the rule set that determines, I guess, the distribution of these techniques that
yeah.
we see, right? And so in judo, we also have the gi that changes things.
Mhm.
And so it just emphasizes different things. So when you have a gi on, like in judo, as opposed to wrestling and no gi jujitsu, it's like having kind of handles all over the body, where otherwise you wouldn't be able to pull by just getting a purchase on like a sleeve or a lapel. And that kind of augments the offensive potential of
Mm,
most pulling throws. So in wrestling, it's very hard to uh, grab somebody from far away and pull. It's easier to push with shots and slip by. In judo, it's very easy to generate a tremendous amount of power by just sometimes one or even, I mean, a couple fingers on the gi. You can send
mhm,
somebody flying. And so that lends itself to throws being a lot more popular because they're easier to do. And it's also harder to shoot for the legs because gripping it increases the offensive potential. A lot of attacks. It also increases your ability to defend, particularly shots, because if somebody's shooting and needs to get close in no gi, if your hand's here, you can kind of slip it, right? But in gi, you can keep that lapel grip, keep that sleeve, and kind of keep them at bay. Um, so, I mean, all that to say that you tend to focus on whatever is going to make you the most successful in your rule set. And so,
mm,
throws, that's where my, I guess I'm most familiar with them because of judo. But if you started with wrestling, where shots are a lot easier and it's harder to throw, you're going to be more familiar with whatever is going to, I guess, increase the likelihood of you being the most successful in that grappling art. So shots, duck unders, etc. Right, in wrestling. Um, and then in jiu-jitsu, it's weird because you have these two sort of arenas where you do stand up, which is no gi and gi. And
mhm,
a lot of times people do both. So you get this sort of hodgepodge of, I guess, uh, yeah, just different grappling philosophies coming together, wrestle, judo, jitsu, you know? And then I think that kind of, it brings a lot of different disciplines together and having people interact where otherwise you may not see them. So like it kind of reminds me of old school UFC where you have these clash of styles. So
Mm,
still good to see that in jiu-jitsu, which I like judo versus wrestling, or this guy's a guard guy versus a passer on top. So yeah, it's but you're right. Like, what is one versus the other? Kind of hard to say.
yeah. You mentioned something that I found myself talking about often, and it's the rule set. And in the absence of the rule set, which could argue there's always a rule set, it's the philosophy that dictates the movements that you do.
Yeah,
Right? There's nobody out there that's going, you cannot do this move as part of your judo philosophy. You can't practice it, right? Like maybe you have an instructor that says that, but there's no like
right. It's
there's
just
no
God,
this
like
is and always will be and can never be changed judo, right? Like
right.
all
And
martial arts have changed.
And originally, so they've kind of whittled judo down, unfortunately, since 2000, I think 10, where all of the leg grabs were taken out. So previously, you could attack the legs with your hands, right? So um,
So we're talking about competitive judo versus what some might call traditional or classical judo.
exactly, yeah. And I think that they do themselves a disservice, martial arts, when the more restrictions they impose, because you're always going to get people that are going to grapple with, I guess, the sort of goal that one day they would translate whatever they're learning into mixed martial arts. And so, uh, and sometimes those guys do go to mixed martial arts. Sometimes they end up falling in love uh, with the grappling art and
Mm.
staying with it. But that initial sort of entry into martial arts, um, like I'm trying to put myself, if I was interested in becoming like I want to go to the UFC one day, and I was looking at all of these, I might say, well, judo, I need to be able to defend leg attacks or shots. How am I going to do that if I'm just doing judo? So that may push me towards wrestling, but at the same time, wrestling doesn't have submissions, so I might see that and say, well, like I want to be working on these kind of positions that I control somebody in a realistic setting that offers me real feedback, which is like, oh, I shouldn't do that, and what does that is a submission. So it's too bad that the rule sets tend to get kind of whittled down and I think distilled too much. But yeah, I'm sure there's some guy that I'm sure there's I guess data that I don't know about. Maybe it does increases sort of the amount of spectators in the sport, but I like to see it all.
Well, and I'm with you, right? Like to me, a better martial artist is a diverse martial artist, right? Like I philosophically line up with grab everything. And actually, we just put up a clip on my Instagram and TikTok like yesterday or something. And it was Gerald Nakamura, who, if you don't know by name, you would recognize him. He's been the bad guy, like he's the Asian bad guy with the beard that you've
I
seen
like
in
them
like
already.
40 movies. Yeah. Great guy. He was on the show a few weeks ago. And he talked about it as a garbage disposal. Be a garbage disposal. Take everything in and
Yes.
then just, and I like that visual kind of better than the way Bruce Lee talked about it, right? Like just this idea, give me everything. Don't you decide what I don't want.
Yeah,
Let me take everything and figure out what works for me.
that's exactly. And you have more, your input's greater when you expose yourself to a more variety of techniques, right? And so if you have a higher input, then chances are once you go through the process of figuring out what best suits your natural abilities or kind of decreases the likelihood of having your weaknesses exposed, that's the more tools that you have to choose from, the better you're going to be. And you also, I mean, so I started judo when I was 15, and I'm now 32. So I've been doing it for a long time, but I still learn things. And honestly, I learn them more often from people that uh, aren't very experienced in judo because I see them do things and I try to always have an open mind. And if somebody did something that kind of surprised me, kids especially, kids are really good at this. I remember there's this like 15-year-old kid who I was getting to do a drill with one of my teammates. Her name's Audrey, who trains, uh, and this kid Merrick. He was like, "Well, why do you go all the way down to the mat when you're practicing this fit in? Why don't you just go halfway because you get more reps in?" And I remember thinking, like, "Damn it, Merrick! Like that's super smart. I wish I'd thought of that 15 years ago."
Yeah.
There's always something that you can learn, and there's always somebody that you can learn from. And yeah, like if you kind of adopt that, not only tribal, I guess, like mentality with the discipline, but also when people get too elitist about like like I've definitely seen like people suggest something that I thought was a good idea, and then I can tell the person that wow, this was suggested to, who's very experienced, kind of poo-poos it, right? They're just like, I'm not, come on, I'm such and such, and you're just
Right, right, and that's what they always do. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Why is it that people get so defensive about this stuff? And here's what I think it is, and I'm curious if you land where I do on this. If we spend a bunch of time training, and we generally believe that our training is good, right? I've never seen a martial arts school where the instructor says, I'm terrible and everything I'm teaching you sucks. Right? Like,
yeah,
it's like, hey, there's some good stuff here. Keep working hard and you'll get better. Like, that's the worst. And then you've got plenty of people who, and I feel like this is decreasing, where it's like, you have magically stumbled onto the most amazing fighting art on the planet. I am supreme ultra grand champion of the world, and you could not have picked a better place. Like,
yeah.
good for you,
And I would love to show you the techniques I've mastered, but
and I,
it's too dangerous for you.
well, even if they don't get there, right? Like, people tend to come up with this belief, and there's some hardwired physiology, ego stuff in here about believing that we can fight, right? What
Mm-hmm.
is it, like 40% of adult men think that they could defeat? Is it a chimpanzee?
Oh, okay.
Just utterly ridiculous, like numbers wise. Like, if you think you could take out a chimpanzee, folks, please go do a little bit of research. It's not going to happen. You're going to lose your face. But they come up, and it's like, okay, I'm good. I've put in time. I've put in a decade. I'm skilled. Like, they're doing well in classes. And for somebody to say, but what about this, makes them have to take a step back and say, but I could be better.
Yeah,
There could be more. What if what I've been doing all this time wasn't actually what was best for me?
exactly.
And that creates some fragility, and a lot of people can't handle that.
Yeah, and I get it, because I mean I feel like I've been there with not necessarily martial arts, but just like other things in life. We don't like to think that our time could have been better spent. Like, people don't like to sort of deal with that. And if you can circumvent that sort of line of reasoning by denying that anything else you could have been doing would not have been as worth your time, and that you have been on the
Right.
right track, that's sort of anxiolytic and reduces those feelings of kind of nervousness or just feeling uncomfortable. I think there's another component too, which is people just have a tendency to be kind of elitist, and it's like, I don't know, like college rankings or something. Like, if you can tell somebody like, my college is ranked X versus my college is ranked Y, like, people, there's a pride, and that probably also comes from some fragility. uh, they like to, that whatever they're a part of, to be held in the highest regard of their kind of the general public. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've definitely been guilty of those things too, and I definitely
We
less
we
so
all
now
have.
in my 30s, but in my teens, oh man, my 20s, ugh, still not so great. But now I'm better. Now I'm speaking of chimpanzees, and like learning from grappling. Like, I'm always doing this, and it's probably super weird, and but I'm obsessed with dogs and animals, but like my whole family has a bunch of dogs. They're all very close, and I'm always watching them wrestle and like how they interact. And you'll see a lot of the same things that you see on the mat with just animals that are just
Yeah.
born with that intuition, and kids too, with just like a simple, like dogs like faking somebody to the left and then going to the right. They do that, and I've definitely looked at like how they fake and tried to figure out like, okay, interesting. So they use more of like their their sort of head movement to fake versus like I use my hips. Like, I wonder what happens if I were to use my head. It doesn't work usually, but sometimes
Right.
uh, a small percentage of the time it does end up translating. And so, I mean, why not?
Have
It's free
have you
opportunities.
seen? And I just made note because we have to find this and put this in. Have you seen the clips of like the guy putting his pit bull in a gi top?
Oh, wait, that sounds
I-
super familiar.
It is the best because you know you if folks out there, like if you've ever played with a pit bull, you know that they do not deserve the reputation they
Oh,
have.
they're
They
the
are the most
best.
ridiculous animals, but they're built like they are solid dogs. Their heads are like carved out of granite, and so this guy has his dog, this big pit bull, and he's got a judo gi on it, and he's pulling positions, and the dog's like
Yeah, they probably loved
right,
it.
and so he's doing it, and he's pulling positions, and the dog's trying to bite him, and he's using it as a stimulus. Like I got to stay away from this. This is a whole other thing. You know, when you roll, you're probably not worried about people biting you, and it's actually one of the major criticisms of jujitsu as a street self-defense is you're now pulling this person. And we had somebody on the show, I forget who it was, where the guy secured it and he got his pec bit
He got his
in the
what?
street.
Sorry?
His pectoral muscle bit.
Oh my God.
The guy, he was, this was a street confrontation, he got chomped. And like, oh, rule set would never say, I'm sure somewhere in the rule set it says don't bite, but people don't even. Can I bite? Right? Like it's just not a thing that we do. But the dog. This is what the dog does. The dog doesn't have hands. The dog has a mouth. So
Yeah.
to start looking at it in that way,
It's so funny that you said
plus it's a trip.
the pitbull
It's
thing.
just
I'll send you this video.
yeah.
I have a video of me. There's a pitbull at the gym that I go to, and I'm constantly playing with it. And there's a video of me like practicing my like guard passing on it. I'll send it to you because
I
it's
love it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
we'll put
biting,
that
that's
in.
crazy. That sucks for that guy. There's yeah, that and the eye gouging, pinching. I mean, I think with a lot of those things, I mean, as long as they're not biting, I guess like your neck or if you're in if you're in a position where their mouth, I guess, is near either your arm or like hips or whatever. I mean, you'll probably get bit, but I think it's rare that that would end up being a fight stopping injury. I like if they're biting my arm and I have a choke in, like, I mean, chances are I'll be able to finish the choke and maybe my arm will be cut open, but yeah, I don't know.
But it adds a whole other dynamic,
Yeah.
right? Because what's the first thing you're taught in jujitsu? Like on your back, you're wrapped up, you're safe, right? Like that's literally how I was taught. You're safe.
that's
Well,
that's another thing that I've
maybe
tried.
a little less safe.
So like in jujitsu, like my goal is I want to be able to beat the best guys that I can. And
Sure.
so I have approached that with almost trying to break every rule in jujitsu or every dogma, with the rationale sort of being that, well, if I design my game around, let's say, taking somebody's back, there's going to be guys that have been in the sport for decades that have half of their experience defending somebody on their back.
Yeah.
Or I can say, well, like judo is very sort of positionally focused, and you often try to get pins and prioritize that over taking somebody's back. And from those pins, there are various submissions. And so I sort of believe that, well, if I can take an existing skill set I have, so like with going to your back, like I never play off my back unless I
Mm,
absolutely have to, because same rationale. There's guys who've spent over half their time doing that, and so I don't want to fight them where they're strong. I want to fight them where I'm strong, and I want to
right.
sort of have a game that's unorthodox. The people in my gym that I've kind of built up, uh, just to understand the things that I'm doing, they're familiar with it. But then I go elsewhere and fight a guy that I may face, I don't know, like let's say a tournament, they're not going to be familiar with it, because if you're unorthodox, you don't have to be as good. And so it's a little like cheat code I like to tap into all the time.
Yeah. And as you bring that up, you were talking about the UFC and MMA before, and anything where we have sport involved in martial arts, not just martial arts, but there's a cycle, right? If you're a student of the UFC, you've seen some would call it an evolution. I call it a cycle. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that
Yeah,
has
I like that.
come and gone, and you can say the same thing about pro basketball, right? Like there was a time when the 3-point shot wasn't as big of a deal,
Yeah, you're right.
and then it became a really big deal again, right? But if you go way back, it was a big deal, right? So like things go in these cycles, because if you've got really big people who are really good at defending under the hoop, Well, where do you get some space? Out of
Exactly.
out of
Yeah.
the 3-pointer. And so what happens over time? People, the people in the NBA start getting a little bit faster, maybe a little bit smaller, a little more versatile, and that closes that down. So if you get somebody who's big monster, then they start pushing back in, and they're closing from a shorter distance. And you could kind of say the same thing. Actually, you use a lot of the same words
No,
about MMA.
you're absolutely right. It's less, I would say, of like a linear evolution and more of a, like a cyclical evolution. Um, you have, and that's another uh, giving away all my little cheats. But another thing, I love watching film, but I like watching these really old matches better than I do the new ones because I feel that there's more likely to be some gem that may have been popular, like you said, back then. And uh, if there was something that was popular back then, uh, and people were used to it, and people are still hitting it, chances are, I mean, it's not like grappling changes all that much. Like chances are it's still gonna work. So I love stealing those like old black and white like footage sort of techniques, and I see something I'm like, oh, I wonder if that will work. And then sure enough, it usually does if it's been in kind of battle tested. So
Yeah. It's, there are only so many ways the body can move,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
rule sets will carve some of those away.
yeah. It's not like people
And
have new elbows that bend a different way.
yeah. But you even talked about it, right? Like, if you want to be super high level, you kind of have to focus on an aspect of a game.
Yeah,
And martial artists might, push away at that. But if we're talking competitive, show me a sport where people are equally good at everything, right? Like in
yeah,
all pro sports, you tend to specialize. And even in individual sports like tennis, people will talk about this person's got a great serve, this person's got a great forehand, great backhand, they have great movement. And yeah, you want to have all those things, but inevitably, just the amount of time it takes to be
yeah,
top
exactly.
tier.
So maybe I'll like refine what I said. So having I guess the largest kind of breadth of available techniques, like looking at a menu. Like I want a big menu, but I'm only going to order a few things.
Mm,
If that makes sense, because I
it
want to focus
does.
on a very kind of few amount or less techniques. I believe are more like so I learn submissions very slowly. I tend to pick one and then focus on that for a few months until I really feel like I understand it, which is more of just a judo mindset where you don't learn like a million throws. You really focus on a couple. And in jujitsu, I think the culture nowadays is the opposite, where they have like a million DVDs, a million instructionals, and so you could spend your whole time, like all the time you invest, being reasonable at everything, but that's not gonna that's not sort of productive, I don't think, to beating the very best guys because those best guys have experience like most of guys in jujitsu do defending everything. So would I rather have like a lukewarm armbar and triangle and heel hook and I don't know rear naked choke, or would I have just a really really good uh, I don't know, like a north south choke or something. And
Yeah.
so that's what's going to beat the next kind of high caliber guy that's ahead of you is just getting that one technique a little bit better. Um, so that's sort of my mindset.
In my martial arts school, again, I'm teaching karate, stand up. One of the things that when I opened my school, I wanted to do really differently. Most martial arts schools, when they're working on things that are under the context of self defense, it's okay, you've done that. If it's freeform, you've done that the last 5 times, the last 10 times, do something different. No.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to have at least one thing that you can go out on the street with and feel confident in. And
Yes.
I'm not going to dilute that for you to do other things. Once you've got that one down and you've got it solid, yeah, now we'll start adding some versatility to that.
100%. That's such a smart way to approach it, and I bet you already do this, but sometimes as a like a like a teacher, coach, sensei, whatever you call yourself in the various martial arts, you can always identify kind of natural strengths that somebody has, and kind of have a hypothesis going in. Like I think this would be really well suited for you, and then you can kind of refine it as you go. So like like I don't think I'm super physically strong. I was always taller for my weight class. I fought 145, 66 kilos, and I was 5'9", 5'10". So I was always on the taller side. So
Yeah.
there's always like these stocky, sort of more like classic, gymnast or wrestler builds that were more explosive in their hips. So I had to sort of gravitate to like, well, what am I good at? Like, what is my
So I'm going to guess, if I may,
what's that?
if I may guess, that gave you a little more reach, which gave you a little more leverage.
Yep, there you go. And I can reach, especially with my feet. So I use a lot of foot
Mm.
sweeps. And I use a lot of kind of momentum from that to generate kind of uh, extra torque, extra sort of momentum to generate these longer guy techniques. So that's, and I do other ones too, but like that's sort of where I really kind of design my game around. So I try to take advantage of that. In jiu-jitsu, it ends up being, in judo, the culture is a lot kind of more based around these weight classes. Like it's rare for somebody to fight somebody that's two weight classes above them because it can be a little
Mm.
dangerous. But in
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu, the culture is not like that, and so I end up fighting. I'm usually shorter because I'm always like I'm tend to be small. I'm like 170, and most of the guys I don't know probably 190 or something at my gym. So I have to now learn these small guy techniques as well.
Mm.
And sometimes I am the more explosive guy, and I fight it. So yeah, it's more
All right.
variety I think in jiu-jitsu.
Now, if I heard you right, you said you started with judo when you were 15.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, talk about uncommon. It's uncommon for someone to start training as a teenager, and it's uncommon for someone to start in judo. I mean, I love judo. I think it's a beautiful art, and I enjoyed it the bit that I did, and would honestly do it more if it was more around me. But it's not common
Yeah,
in the U.S. So how did that happen?
and speaking of the starting late, I used to get a lot of anxiety about that because I had these goals that I wanted to be as good as I could be in judo, and so all the time, like I used to think, well, like I'm never going to be as good as I could have been if I'd started. Like some of these guys are up there three, their dad's a coach or whatever. I started when I was 15, North Carolina, not a lot of judo. Different now, but when I was growing up, yeah. So I originally started. I had hurt my knee and I had a meniscal tear, so the cartilage in your knee that cushions it when you do things like, let's say, wrestling shots. And so I had wanted to do that, but my knee couldn't handle that sort of those penetration steps where you're like, bah, bah, in for the shot. And so that was why I guess started. And I in the back of my mind figured that, well, I would in high school I wanted to wrestle and I could use that in wrestling, but while my knee healed, but I ended up liking judo so much I stayed with it and just
Hmm.
became.
It's almost the Bill Wallace origin story, right?
Oh, what is that?
I don't know if you know Bill Superfoot Wallace. Short version, hurt his knee in judo and just then went on to become the greatest kicker of all time.
Really? Whoa, that's awesome. Yeah, it's yeah. There's a lot of those injuries in these stand up based martial arts, like especially judo, because like we said, there's handles all over the body, so you can generate a lot more torque than you could without a gi, and so there's a lot of power often directed at people's knees and shoulders, and so it can be a little sketchy sometimes.
So, what was it you found in judo that you loved so much that you stuck with?
Man, it's just so fun. There's nothing I don't think like so in judo, while you can generate a lot of like power and torque, that sort of feels almost like because you can use your I guess your hands so efficiently, it
Mm.
doesn't. It feels like you're almost doing nothing sometimes when you throw somebody, and then sometimes you can get to the point where your technique gets crisp enough, and it actually is like it feels like the same amount of effort as like filling up a glass of water at the sink. Um, and if you do that and somebody goes flying, like foot sweeps, that's why I like them so much. It's no effort, and they like looks like they slipped on ice. Like looks so dramatic. Uh, it just feels so fun. I wish I had a better sort of more methodical, I guess, answer, but it is just I love the feeling of throwing somebody for ippon. And from all my friends, I guess, in judo are all addicted to that same feeling. I don't know. There's something about it that just feels so good.
There's a feedback, right? There's a feedback in grappling that in striking arts we don't always get, because you can throw someone at a closer to 100% than you can punch them
Right.
in
Exactly.
most contexts. And as you get better, right, it's like, oh, they went higher and hit the mat faster or harder with seemingly less effort. I must be getting better.
Yes.
Whereas I, as a striker, I'm like, I think I got you. Did I get you? I don't know. Did I get you? Yeah, you got me. Okay,
I've
cool.
wondered about
Great. I'm
that.
getting better.
I've wondered about that. Is that I don't know. Have you ever been frustrated with that? Like, does that make it less fun, or are you used to it?
There
So now
there are
you,
other ways. There are other ways to kind of track that and look at things. But there's um, one of the things we used to say in my school. There's no politics in a knockout,
hmm,
right? And inherently in most striking art competitions, whether we're talking about point or continuous, even if there is a degree of contact, it's still not generally full contact. And this is one of the arguments people make for boxing or for UFC, MMA, right? Is that you can go harder, but it sucks to practice that way,
oh yeah,
right?
and it's
Like I'm
just
not going to get in there,
right.
even if I'm training to be something like that, which I'm not. But I'm not going to get in there with my friends or fellow students or my students and start drilling them,
Right.
because bloody noses and black eyes don't work with our society.
Yeah.
But if somebody, they hit the mat a little bit hard, they might limp to work the next day. Oh, what happened? Had a tough rolling session yesterday. That's socially acceptable, and they're probably going to come back better for it.
But even that, I like. So as I've gotten older, I've really tried to hone the techniques that I choose with the ones that I can practice that don't put unnecessary mileage on people's bodies. So
Sure.
even like what you said with taking falls on the mat, like I hate that. Like everybody hates that. It's not comfortable. It's not fun. It hurts. It's like a slap.
Mhm.
It, sometimes you can kind of twist like an ankle or something. So I try to look at it where I'll sort of look at it like this. Well, if I choose a technique that I can get 90% of the practice, productive practice out of it by not throwing, by just fitting in here, um, I'm going to have training partners that I can, that I'm not going to be just burying into the mat over and over. Like I'm not going to do that. That's messed up for me. So I try to select those techniques like my Osotogari that I like to do. I don't need to throw like maybe one out of every 100 it's helpful for me to throw, but most of the
Mm.
time it's just fitting in and then getting feedback. Like my main training partner Alex, I fit in. It's like, well, how's that feel? And he'll say good, and that like means that like we've had these conversations now for a long time. Like I don't feel that I could counter with an Osoto or a co Soto this way, and I did not feel that I could twist it. You know what I mean? And so that feedback coupled with techniques that don't take away your time in the sport, which like taking a lot of falls, like getting punched a bunch in the face. You know what I mean? That's I think
Yeah.
the real future of martial arts, because you're going to have athletes that can compete in it longer, and that
Mm.
sort of window gets the competition window gets pushed a little bit further up.
Yeah. Because this is one of the differences. I can practice uh, a wider breadth of striking stuff solo than I can grappling stuff,
Yeah,
right?
that yeah,
It's tough to practice your in a Sotogari
oh yeah,
with nobody, right? Like, I
right.
mean,
That's a good
we made the joke about the dog, and there are throwing dummies out there, but they're not going to give you the same feedback.
right, right. That's
So if you're smashing that, you said Alex, if you're smashing Alex every time, he's probably going to be like, I don't know, Austin, I'm feeling a
yeah.
little
We
sick
got a
today.
big dummy over there. That hurts pretty good.
But if you tuck in and you break his balance, right? A couple feet come off the floor, you're like, oh, okay, we're there.
Yeah,
And he doesn't have to go home battered from it.
exactly. And he also knows now like that feeling of like if you're just taking a fall, like it's hard to really know what would have happened. Like you're not really thinking about it. Like, oh, could I have blocked it here? But when you have that like feedback, both people are engaged. Where like, how? What about now? Like oh, good. Like oh, bad. And then I'll ask like, well, why is that bad? And then he's like, well, I feel like I could do this. And then sometimes we'll disagree. And it's like, all right, let's go and try it. Like, and
Mm,
one of us has to try it. But
yeah. It's a much more cerebral approach, which I
yeah.
certainly understand.
And another
Uh,
thing with that, with like not throwing, so throwing somebody over and over, that's a very common drill, and it on crash pads too, it gets you extremely tired. It's so tiring with a lot of throws, with like throwing somebody one, trying to get as many as you can, like try to get, I don't know, like 50 and 100 seconds or something. It's really exhausting, and when you're tired like that, I just don't think you learn as well. It's like if I were to study for a test, would I rather study after like a long day when I'm exhausted, or would I rather study in the morning after like a cup of coffee? You know, like I would do better on that test if I were to study when I'm at my most energetic, feeling good. And so I try to always kind of dictate the pace of my drilling to accommodate that.
yeah, there are certainly times where we want to put things on autopilot, and then there are other times where we have to improve the autopilot,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and those are two very different approaches.
Yeah, definitely.
So you started with judo, but obviously at some point you went, "There's more. I want the more." When and why the more?
Well, so I quit, retired, whatever you want to call it, from judo in 2014. And looking back, I wish I hadn't. I think I cut it a little bit too short, and maybe that was sort of part of the motivation for wanting to get back into grappling. At the time, um, I had gotten into medical school, and so I went for 4 years. And like during that time, and then residency, I didn't do any grappling. There just wasn't enough time, and so uh, I kind of always hoped that it would be something that void that was kind of left in the wake of my decision to stop doing
Mm,
judo, that would get filled by I guess medicine, and I'd find some other hobbies. But I think a lot of us in the martial arts world, like you get a taste of how awesome martial arts is, and there's nothing that can, I guess, fulfill you in that same way. And so I ended up, after I guess 6 years, thinking like, well, like I need this in my life again. And judo, like just judo, would have been a little bit frustrating for me because uh, a, it's a little bit more dangerous, and b, I would be a lot worse. I wasn't going to be as good as I was when I was training at the Olympic Training Center full time, and I didn't think I was going to compete because I'd already done that a lot. Um, but jujitsu was very appealing because it had a lot of what I liked about judo, but it was also new to me, and so I could learn very quickly, filling in those gaps. And but it was still different, where I still had a lot of what I used to love so much about judo, which is this problem solving. Like I get a problem, I go home, back to the lab, and I think about it. You know, like how can I fix this? Like how can I adjust my Uchimata so I don't get countered? You know what I mean? Like that's so fun. That's what's the best part about all this, is that problem solving. And so it's like I get to take a whole new subject and learn, and I just love learning things.
mm,
And then also I
nice.
think it's uh, so judo has like given me so much, and I've always like wanted to, uh, I guess, to give back in some way, but I didn't really know what that meant. Like, or is that stupid? Like giving back to like this just set of like principles. But that feeling never really left. I never really thought it like, I never really grew out of that. And so uh, for the first time, I felt like I was able to do that. Do you know that the guy Sensei Seth? He has a YouTube
Yeah.
channel.
Yes, that's been on. He's a good guy.
Yeah. He's the man. He came and did a judo video, and like it went really well. And I felt like it was the first time that I really felt like I got to do that, which is like give back to judo. He like ranks the martial arts, and he had previously ranked it as like a C, and then he moved it up to A tier. So that was awesome. Like I loved that. And with jujitsu, there aren't a lot of people. I mentioned Justin Flores, the guy who I got the shirt from. there are not a lot of people who are implementing judo in a no-gi setting. And so I kind of like that I get to give back to both grappling as a whole and judo
Hmm.
by, I guess, exploring this new territory and figuring out how to just how to advance the craft because it's still new, and that's a little niche that I think I can do it in.
Yeah. And so for the audience, what you're kind of talking about, jujitsu at some point split. You know, somebody along the way probably said, uh, "Yeah, but we don't wear gis on the street, right? So how does this work on the street?" And so everybody now wears these very specialized compression rash guards that they also don't wear on the street. But you know, that's a whole other conversation. And so you know, some folks said, okay, how does judo, right? It's kind of a similar question. How does judo work when everybody's not wearing a gi with, you know, these 12-pound heavy weave, 4-inch wide lapels?
Yeah,
I have a judo
and
gi in
so
there, so I'm not picking.
no. And then my job is sort of getting this like large menu of techniques and then figuring out like, well, which ones should I abandon completely, which ones work already without any adjustments, and then the majority of them, it's like, okay, what adjustments, how can I tweak them to both work in no-gi but then also um, satisfy, I guess, the rule set. So where there are any ippons and you don't get in judo, if you throw someone hard to their back, match is over. In jiu-jitsu, you can get takedowns, but there's no, if you throw them with amplitude on their back, nothing, no additional points for that. No points for throwing them to their stomach versus back. None of that matters. So uh, the emphasis becomes like, which of these techniques uh, put, puts me at the lowest amount of risk. So, like with a shot, for example, you get guillotine as a risk, right? So, but with Osotogari, let's say, where you're putting your leg outside somebody else's leg, um, that I think becomes more appealing in these sort of throws and a lot of shots because you're not leading with the most vulnerable part of your body, your head and your neck, where which is the most common ways that jiu-jitsu matches get ended with a choke, right? And so with judo, I tend to emphasize a lot of these leg throws that don't place me at risk if things don't go well at getting submitted. So yeah, it's just trying to hack, I guess,
Yeah,
judo and apply it.
it's cool, and this is, you know, this is one of my favorite things about martial arts is that martial arts, because you know it just is, right, and the body moves in different ways, and we wear different clothing, and the times are different. It can adjust, it can become more contemporary. And I am not someone who says, you know, because we did it this way 100 years ago or 50 years ago, that's better. It's different. It's traditional or classical is the word I'm hearing more folks use that I like better. But I think there's a tremendous amount of value, even if just for psychological purposes, to figure out how do I take this stuff that I learned and make it work today and now. You know, what happens when, you know, modern tools, weapons are involved. It's
Yeah,
different.
and that is, I guess, the original sort of how all these martial arts changed. It's because they were less often doing it for fun and more often, like with judo, like samurais grabbing each other's armor. Like the sort of rules came from if you throw somebody on their back hard, well, like you're going to have an advantage now in a fight if you have a sword where they're lying on their back with a bunch of armor and you're standing. Well, like it'd be easy for your buddy to come along with a spear or
Right.
whatever and get them. So I guess that's sort of how all of these kind of branched and changed. And then different kind of
Sure.
geographic pressures and weapons, and then now probably a lot less people are able-bodied. Uh, just even probably in the military than there would be when there weren't any guns, right? Because everyone was doing hand-to-hand combat, so it's more important.
Yeah. Not everyone is okay with those changes, though. Do you get pushback? Do you get, let's say, classical judoka responding to
Yeah,
your stuff and they're like, "Ah, oh, Austin, you're the worst. Why would you do this? That's not judo. I hate you.
definitely.
I'm sending glitter bombs to your house."
No, for sure. There's a. and it doesn't really bother me anymore, just because I think I've gotten like more laid back as I've
Yeah.
gotten older. And it would have driven me crazy, and every once in a while it still gets to me. But there's one. So in the Sensei Seth video, I show my like favorite Osotogari
Mm,
entry, and it's not one that I made up. It's one that I copied from the like Olympic gold medalist, from probably the best. I mean, definitely the best judoka of our generation. This guy, Shohei Ono. He does his Osotogari very different,
mm,
but it's most effective. And then, like I saw that adjusted my game. I used to do it the old way. Doesn't work as well, and so I do it this way now. But yeah, for sure, there are like a lot of people in the comments like the way he showed Osoto is completely wrong. Like, what a disgrace to.
right.
But like, it's just so I do get that, and really, it's most often like nobody who I guess is familiar with competitive judo. Like, unless you like lived under a rock, you would have seen the best judoka of our generation doing their technique like this, right? But it's often people who have been fans for a long time and have been in it for a long time, and then sort of think experience uh, in a martial art and I guess adeptness in it is only a function of how much time that you've been in it. Like, you start the clock.
Right.
It's like I've been doing judo for 50 years, but I mean, chances are I've done judo more than they have, because I judo for 6 hours almost like a day for the vast majority of my life. Like, it's I don't know. You get that
I,
sometimes,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but
and I like to hit them with this paradox: things can't get better unless they change.
right, yeah, exactly.
And
And it wouldn't. That's a good point.
and
I,
you watch heads explode, and it's
yeah, like wait a minute. Well,
so. And the I generally get two responses to that: either silence because they know they're done, or so. Are you saying that the founding masters, that you're better than them, right? That's they'll kind of twist it in that way, and
again, it gets so culty so fast. Like tend to not do well with like hierarchy in general. Like, I think it's kind of dumb a lot of the time. And I'm not even a big fan of belts, because I mean, so many people come in like to jujitsu, like me and my buddy Nigel. So my buddy Nigel wrestled Division 1, like went to like NCAA state qualifier or NCAA qualifier, like the national tournament.
so
He won.
he's pretty good.
He knows his way around a wrestling mat. Yeah. And then like me with judo, I've done it a long time. So we go in and we do jujitsu at the same gym. Um, so, I mean, and it all like there's differences, but I mean, 80% of it is the same. And so us, like, compared to some guy who's just walking like 40 years old, starting any sport for the first time, like you get a lot of that these days. There's such a different amount of kind of different experiences level coming into, especially jiu-jitsu. It takes everybody. um, and so I tend to prefer how wrestling does it, where there's no belts, and it's just sort of your like competition results and like your technical ability in the practice room, and when we show techniques like that, sort of demonstrates how good I guess you are. But I mean, that's just my opinion. Everybody has that.
People want to know where they fit into a social structure, and that's
Yes.
really where what happens with belts. And um, I'm experimenting with something in my school that dramatically changes the way rank is handled, and so far my students are game. We're gonna
Oh,
see
cool.
how that progresses. Not going to give the details quite yet. Some folks know, but I don't want to say this is what I'm doing as if it works. But it's around think competency and think merit badges. It's the
Yeah, I like that.
easiest way to think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. But in jiu-jitsu, I think it's bad about judo isn't so bad, partly because the belt system has been diluted down so much. It's very easy to get your black belt. It can like, I mean, it can take, I don't know, 2 years or something. It's not super uncommon. Uh, so people end up not caring about in judo, like in the kind of competition scene, like everyone's a black belt, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But in jiu-jitsu, they've sort of preserved that, uh, like what that means, which I think there is something to be said for. Like, I do kind of like that. Like, I do know what I'm getting. If I'm like this, if the guy's a brown belt, he's a black belt. Chances are he's good. In judo, it not necessarily, because you can get some guy who started when he was like 40, who'd never done any sports, and then a few years gets his black belt. So uh, yeah, jujitsu tends to be, they care, I think, more about the belts than in judo.
But that's also starting to change, right? Like because there was so much emphasis put on it for such a long time, that you get schools that will push, and they push people, and it's always a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
It's always a race to the bottom of things like that, because people will say, I want this thing because the culture of the social structure says this thing is of value, and so people will cheat, right? Like, we know people have always stolen, people will always steal, people will lie, they will do that, they'll do that, um, well, it took me this many years to get this belt, and you know what? I don't care.
That,
Show me what you can
that's
do. Show me
really,
what you can
that's
teach me.
really, it's really interesting what you said though, because I feel like I'm obsessed with evolutionary biology and martial arts, but I've never thought of that. You're absolutely right. People like, and maybe even need sometimes, to know where they stand in a
Yeah.
social hierarchy. Like, it's, I guess people, if that makes them feel comfortable, it may be uneasy if you don't. And I guess going back to dogs, man, like dogs, that is their whole life. It's like showing where they are in the pack. Like my dog's constantly getting bones and then going to where the other ones are and chewing them in front of them to sort of display
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I'm the top dog here.
We are hardwired for this. A
Yeah.
lot of the work that when I'm traveling and I'm teaching seminars, we're talking about these concepts around safety, and you can't learn if you don't feel unsafe, but also you can't learn well if you're concerned that you will lose social standing in the group,
Huh.
right? So,
Yeah.
like, I'm a few years older
Right.
than you, but I was raised in school. The greatest fear is public speaking, and it's not. The greatest fear is being ostracized, because it
That's,
wasn't that long ago that if you were ostracized, it meant certain death.
yeah.
So
Right.
we
There was a
crave
selective
that place
pressure.
in the hierarchy, and as we come up, as we earn a jujitsu purple belt, we're not bottom on the totem pole here. We're not the first one to get carved off when food becomes scarce, and there's a
Boom.
feeling of safety in there.
Man, that's beautiful. Beautiful reasoning. That's I'm all about that. You're so right. It's that, I mean, like 15th century, like Europe, I think would have been a perfect example where food was so scarce. Like you have, and all these German fairy tales, right? Like from, like there's certain themes that constantly emerge. One of them is like the old like witch hag that like eats kids, right? And really it's because you have this woman who, often older, targeted, right? Who isn't like, doesn't mesh in with the community right now. And so when resources are scarce, like she's not helping them. So it kind of makes sense that like she would be the first one to have something like, oh, nope, no, like goat for you. Like,
Right.
so that you're right. There would be a selective pressure to fit in and not get ostracized. If you know where you stand in a hierarchy, then the people who would make that decision above you, you're going to kind of suck up to, and you don't have to worry about talking down to the other people quite as much. It reminds me too of like what you said, people, they don't learn as well when they're worried about getting ostracized, like answering a question in class, like even if you know the answer, right? It's scary. And that, I guess, fear
It's
comes from the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And so what I liked, you're talking about working with your training partner Alex, the way you're talking it through, right? There's no fear there, right? He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be worried that you're going to smash him, and you're collaborating in this
Mm-hmm.
educational process, which is honestly, that's how people learn. Right? If you really dig into the psychology of how people learn things, you have to be comfortable. You have to feel safe, and
Yes.
this is why so many people are, I mean, we could probably veer and spend a couple hours here if you're, because I can tell you're interested in this stuff, but this is why
Yeah.
so many people are coming through public school and learning nothing, because they are terrified for any variety, or in most cases a bunch of different reasons,
Yeah.
from the time they get there till the time they leave.
Right. Exactly. And you're so right. Like you clam up, and like when you're feeling like that, like you don't remember anything. So unless you're feeling comfortable, you're not going to be at your best. And this sort of feedback, I guess, what's this word for, like
Pedagogy.
pedagogy? Yeah, pedagogy. That approach makes sense. And I think too, like a pet peeve of mine is when you have this sort of social, like when I guess technical prowess or whatever in something extends to a social setting. So
Mm-hmm.
like when you have somebody that's better at somebody else at jujitsu, where they're treated, I guess, almost like with like reverence compared to somebody who just started. Like people just don't even listen to what he has to say. Like that always
High school
bugs me.
athletes are the probably the best
Yes.
example of this, right? I
Yes.
mean, the
Uh-huh.
stereotype of the captain of the football team or the captain of the basketball team being the
Yeah.
most popular kid in school, right? It's
Mhm.
quite common, and we see it a lot in traditional martial arts. We see, and one of my pet peeves, and I, this is probably going to bother a few people, but it's my show and I don't care.
Yeah.
When martial arts instructors ask to be referred to by their martial arts title in a non-martial arts context.
Oh yeah, that's weird.
Yep, I agree.
That's and it's just like it bugs people when you're making them do something. And I mean, like it kind of goes back to like at the end of the day, people just don't like being told like how to speak, right? And so if you're outside of a martial arts school or whatever, outside of martial arts company, and you say like I like you call me this, like that's going to annoy people, right?
Yeah, and you end up going back to the social structure, right? Like if you've spent enough time in that group and you resonate with that group and you feel a sense of belonging there, you're willing to make that concession even if you disagree with it often
Yes,
to
definitely.
remain in that group and not have to get kicked out of the tribe and fend for yourself.
And like on the other side, like I call my jujitsu coach Brandon, who's like my friend, but I call him coach just because I like doing that. Like it's like but I like it being my choice. You know, like I like the
You
autonomy.
are giving respect. You can't. This is
Yes,
you cannot
yes,
demand respect. I can't make
yes,
you respect me. I can make you act with certain behavior that suggest respect, but you could say thank you, Jeremy, and be thinking some very different words when you
yeah,
say that.
yeah, 100%. That's you're right. It's people like they like to have respect that's earned and given freely. That's the I guess the ultimate sort of form of it, and not just fear of being ostracized. That's something different.
Mm.
I love this stuff, man.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
expect
This
this. This
this
is
is good stuff. This was fun. I appreciate you coming on. If people want to find you, I mean, we're gonna help me make sure that we get that video with Sensei Seth linked up.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but for the other stuff, social media, websites, anything like that, you want to share with folks?
So I'm just on Instagram right now.
Okay,
Bad Boy Medicine, catchy dumb name, and yeah, Sensei Seth, the man, he did a judo video with us on his YouTube channel.
nice.
Sensei Seth, I think it's the I tried judo, and then he has another one with his competition experience the next day. Definitely check it out. But yeah, it's that's the best sort of place to find me right
Okay,
now.
right on.
And
Well,
thank you so much
oh
for
yeah, yeah.
having me on.
Thanks for being
I'm
here.
still sort of always caught off guard when like people want to interview me. I'm sure that's not something that's like super unique or anything, but we all feel like that. But I always think like, why?
I'll
It,
interview anybody who
it's
seems like they
I'm
have some
honored
cool
that
stuff to
like
talk
you would
about.
want to, that people would want to hear what I have to say. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate
Well,
it.
this has been really good and fun. And I'm going to pass it back to you in a moment here. But for the audience, if you have a guest suggestion, don't be afraid to reach out. You can email me, jeremy@whistlekick.com. I'll kick that over to Andrew, or if you want to email Andrew directly, andrew@whistlekick.com. Our social media is @whistlekick, and you can support us pretty much any way you could think of that makes sense. You can support the Patreon. You could buy something. But the number one thing that I ask people, tell people about the show. Help us spread this show. Help us reach the other martial artists in the world so they can hear conversations like this that, what, maybe it doesn't change the way people think, but at least it gets them to think. And I think that that's
Yeah,
the most important thing.
it's just progress in the direction.
Yeah. But Austin, how do you want to close us up today? Your final words to the audience, what would those be?
Mm, let's see. Well, let me start again. I just appreciate you for having me on.
Sure.
Appreciate anyone that's listened this far for hearing what I have to say. And man, like I just want to really thank the followers that I have and like the people that are interested in my page. It's I am so lucky because I felt like without martial arts that we all like to have feel like we have a purpose and feel fulfilled from that. I felt like lost for a lot of years without it, and so having a group of people that is interested in learning what I'm passionate about, and me getting to do that and help them with their grappling. That's the best possible gift that I could have gotten. And I am so deeply appreciative of all of them. And so, yeah, and everyone at my gym, Triangle Jiu Jitsu, has helped me with it and helped me advance my game. My coach, Brandon, my main training partner, Alex, those two especially, they're essential and are essential in all of this. So thank you to them, and thank you to you and everyone, all the listeners.